If you or someone you know is considering suicide, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or text the crisis text line at 741-741.
And that's why I'm hopeful that with my work and my colleagues' work, that we can bring more awareness and education and hope back, so this doesn't have to happen. I don't want to see kids get to that point where they feel suicidal or they attempt or succeed. I do feel hopeful that with empowering parents and empowering kids, there are other solutions that can be done. And it's not an easy road, and I would never make it that way. But it's certainly, if kids know they're supported and there's a place to talk about things where they're not going to get in trouble, they're not going to have reactivity, and there's going to be an openness to that dialogue, it's going to create safety. So that safety will be there, as you said very well earlier on, that you have to start that early. So when the issue really comes, that safety's there.
When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Welcome to Awareness, a show that takes you beyond the headlines. If you are finding the show for the first time, this is the final episode, at least for now, on the bullying series. When I conceptualized this series, I wanted to bring you bullying from different angles. It was my goal to show you bullying from a school administrator's perspective. We did that on episode 3 with Dr. David Perrodin. I wanted to expose how devastating it could be and how it could really happen to anyone. Mallory's story is a powerful one, and it gives you a good overall view of the problem and how, in just a short amount of time, it can drain the life and spirit out of our kids. It was important for me to show you how involved Dianne was in trying to address this issue, how she underestimated the effects of bullying, and how deep the spiritual wounds could be. I can relate to Dianne's perspective, her mindset, as she was going through it. To be honest, it is very likely that I would have followed the same path, as I'm sure most of you would have as well. Mallory's story was highlighted on episodes 14 and 15. I also shared with you my story. I felt it was important to show you how easy it is to get caught up in the power struggle with the schools, and how in some cases, schools are out of touch. As much as I didn't want to hear it, Dr. Perrodin's analysis was tough, but fair. He assisted us in understanding how to navigate a tough conversation, using my story as a real-world example. You heard my story on episodes 16 and 17. And then I shared with you my discussion with Nancy Willard, whose perspective on bullying really changed the way I look at this phenomenon. When you frame bullying situations and wrap them in the context of social dominance, it makes sense how when you bring a bully and the bullied together to resolve the issue, more often than not, it doesn't work. It didn't work in Mallory's case. It is extremely important that we look at bullying from different angles, different perspectives. We need to understand it at its core. Nancy's view gives us more insight and understanding. My discussion with Nancy Willard was on episode 18. On today's episode, we are joined by Danielle Matthew, a bullying expert and author of the book, The Empowered Child. It was really important for me not just to bring you the stories about bullying or the perspectives about bullying, but also to provide solutions so that we can be proactive rather than reactive, because once the effects of bullying take hold, it is very difficult to escape its grasp. Those of you experiencing bullying with your kids know it can feel like we are powerless to help them. But don't fret. Today is about hope, about realizing that help is out there. It's about realizing that you're not alone, that you can get help. Danielle will provide some practical advice that you can start using today. I've been practicing her advice for a few months now, and I've been having some success. Not just with bullying, which I'm happy to say is non-existent at this point, but allowing me to have a deeper connection with my girls. So let's take a step closer to empowering our kids, and stay with me.
I'm Danielle Matthew. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and bullying expert.
Danielle has worked as a clinician in the field over 20 years. She's worked with children and adolescents in various environments, including day treatment programs, residential facilities, and outpatient services. I wanted to know if Danielle had observed an increase in bullying over those 20 years.
So I want to go back a little further to give you a little bit of history so you can kind of put it all in perspective of where I came from and why I'm at the point I'm at. When I was a kid, and it's in my book, The Empowered Child, I talk a lot about my own personal bullying experiences. So even when I go back 20 years ago, I was always interested in that area. That was always a trigger for me. And even being a young adult back then, I got help, but I was still very triggered by my own personal bullying experiences when I was little. So that was an area that I wanted to work on. And as I progressed in my career in different positions, I ended up working for an insurance company. And when I did, I talked to people all across the country. And I was doing clinical assessments for why kids were coming in to programs. And this is when social media has now been in effect. And when they would tell me, they would say bullying was the reason, and it was on Facebook. And one of the things that I would hear a lot historically is that it would be, just go ahead and die, was one of the words and the phrases that was very, very consistent on social media. And so kids were coming into the hospital attempting or making threats to hurt themselves. And the reality was their parents didn't know about it until they got to the hospital. So you can imagine from a parent's perspective, and then me talking to the parents and checking in with them after I did my admission piece for them to come into the hospital. And what I was finding, and I worked in this job for about almost 7 years. So if we look at the progression of social media within that time, it got more profound and more deep as I did my work. And I would ask them and I would say, so what do you have in your community? And remember, I talked to people across the entire United States. And they said a lot of them consistently didn't have a lot. There'd be occasional things in schools here and there, and everyone was doing different things, but there was nothing really clear cut. And they didn't have a program in their community to really support the victims and the families. And so from that, I hired an independent consulting company while I was still working in this position. And I asked them to do a needs assessment in our community and say, well, what do we have community-based, not in schools, not prevention-based programs, because everyone's doing different things at this time. But what do we have that we can actually use in the community to help our victims, our families, education of schools, our community as a whole? And they came back 3 months later to me and they said, we have good news for you and we have bad news for you. And they said, the good news is you have no competition, but the bad news is you have no competition. So why is that? Why don't I have competition? And so they said, if you want, you can put a program together and test it out in the community and then see if you can go for funding and make it a nonprofit status. So a year later, with the help of a developmental psychologist and another therapist, I wrote The Empowerment Space, which is a program for victims of bullying. And it really teaches social skills and self-esteem skills, brings the parents in as activities for families. And we talk a little bit about different scenarios. So cyberbullying is one of those that comes in sometimes. And so the program is really designed for the specific needs of the kids. So sometimes it's cyber, sometimes it's verbal. But, what I'm seeing more and more of is what we call the relational and social bullying, aggression, or we call it, or the cyberbullying, as you're talking about, especially in middle and high schools. With cyberbullying, we know what that is, right? We can't control it. Like when I was a kid, and you were probably a kid, you could leave it at school or leave it wherever it was, and it wouldn't follow you home. Now it follows us into our rooms, into our other social media, our phones, everywhere, our iPads. And it doesn't go away. Snapchat, any of the social media forums. So with that being said, social and relational is leaving kids out, making rumors happen, spreading these rumors, even texting these rumors and making it both a cyber and relational bullying situation. And it has progressively increased over the time I've been doing this work. And so the thing that I have seen a lot is that there's not a consistent way we're all addressing the problem. And I think that becomes the issue because everyone gets defensive, I think, about their own stance on how they want to handle things. And I think in the end, we don't always give solutions to families. We just kind of say things to them that we think are going to make them feel better, but I don't think it really does.
Everything that Danielle has seen over the past 20 years, as far as the progression of bullying through social media, is consistent with what I've found over the past year and a half. Just recently, there's been an explosion of binge-watching series and movies on platforms such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, and other streaming services. One of the more controversial series that has been released in the past few years has been the series on Netflix called 13 Reasons Why, which tackles some aspects of bullying. So I asked Danielle what was her perspective on it.
I wrote a blog article actually on it on season 2. I did one on season 1 and season 2. So I am of the mind that I think it was a very well done show. And I'll tell you why it was well done. Do I think it probably was a little graphic and a little intense? Absolutely. I do not disagree with the critics of that mind. I'm in a lot of different community groups, and so I'm hearing parents' perspectives and opinions on 13 Reasons Why. But here's what it did do, and everyone has to admit that this is true, whether they like the intensity and graphics of what was portrayed. It opened up the conversation now, didn't it? That we don't all want to ever talk about. So that's what it did really well. Do I think some of it was extreme? Probably, but also in the bullying avenue. I won't go into the sexual assault pieces because that's not my expertise. But with the bullying, I thought it was great. Not that it was right on. And even in season 2, you see the progression of how bullying even led to some violence. And, I don't know if you saw season 2, but okay, so you saw that in season 2, it led him at the end to wanting to shoot up kids in the school because he was so horrifically bullied. And I'm not saying any of it was okay. I'm not making it okay. But I think kids get to that point where they just don't know what to do anymore. And if adults are not reaching out in a way to hear them and are critiquing what is happening, which is what I think happened a lot with 13 Reasons Why, instead of looking at how it opened up the dialogue in a way that maybe it never had before, the graphics and the intensity of it were petrifying, I think, many families out there. Right. And let me clarify one thing that I did say very specifically for seasons 1 and 2 in both my blogs that I wrote. I don't think it should be watched alone. I want to be perfectly clear in that. I think that it is intense. It can be for the parents and the kids. The content is intense. But I think it's an excellent exercise in watching with your children. And one of my suggestions with season 2 is perhaps the parents watch it first. So the intensity of it isn't like overwhelming by the time they turn it on with their children and they're prepared a little bit more for it. And then they can have good conversations. But I think it should be watched very carefully and with guidance with a parent. I do not think it's something that should be watched alone. So I just want to clarify that piece.
Danielle explains how she determines whether or not a child is at a crisis point when it comes to bullying.
So there's a lot of signs that you want to be looking for. And the one that I consistently see in my practice a lot is the decline in school and in grades. I see that a lot. That's like the first thing to go is the grades. And they're sleeping more, they're in their room more, they're isolating, they're making excuses for why they don't want to go to school. The friends that you used to see coming over and hanging out are no longer there. They don't want to come out for dinner. So a lot of social isolation from others, decline in grades. Maybe they're sleeping less at night. I mean, you really want to look at a lot of their patterns of behavior and if they're isolating into depression. That's a huge, huge one. But I would say decline in grades is really big.
On episode 16, you heard about my concern about my daughter's grades starting to slip. And so I wanted to know from Danielle, how can you tell if your kids are just struggling with school or if there's an issue at the school that needs to be addressed?
I think we have to tread lightly because especially if we're talking about a teenager, they don't like to be told what to do. So it's really about treading with respect and kindness. So I think as the parent, I have something in my book called the 3 E's: empathy, empowerment, and engagement. And I suggest that approach for parents to talk about whether there's even a bullying problem or an active bullying problem. And the first step is to really use empathy with your child and say, I'm wondering if you're feeling upset. You've been isolating. Is there something going on? Are you feeling hurt? And putting maybe a potential word to what's going on, but not saying, I know you're feeling hurt. I'm seeing that you're isolating and something's wrong. You need to tell me. That is the worst thing a parent can do because it pushes their child away and they lose their own sense of self and ability to come back and say how they're feeling. So it has to be very open-ended. And that's the first thing that I would suggest is a really open-ended conversation about, I'm wondering if you're feeling this, without telling them that that's what they're feeling. And if they can identify that there's some bullying going on and there's some problems, and again, let me refer to you what bullying is its repeated pattern of behavior where someone has power over somebody else. So not necessarily a one-time thing means they're being bullied. So parents need to really be aware of that when they're having this open-ended empathic conversation. It could be a conflict resolution, or it could be bullying if it's repeated grade after grade, day after day. The second thing I suggest is really empowering our kids. I'm really finding more in the work that I do and seeing teenagers in my practice that we have to empower them to handle problems themselves. They don't want parents involved. They don't want to burden parents. They don't want to hurt parents' feelings. And they want to feel like they can take the power back. And they don't know how. So the guidance is the piece that's important as the parent to provide. So you would really want to ask if there is a potential, let's just say there's a social or relational bullying situation going on. We'll use that as an example. And there's some gossiping, rumors being spread at school. So you really want to say to them, well, how would you like to handle that? And I know you just said to me you're feeling scared and you don't want to go to school and you're worried about what people are thinking of you. How would you like to handle that? And they may say, I don't know. I'll take care of it myself. And then as the parent, the guidance needs to continue to the point where you say to them, well, what if we do a role play right now of a situation that you're encountering at school? And then I can play one role and you can play another. And then you kind of get an idea as the parent, if they agree to do it, what they're going through and their experience. And you can come up with some solutions. Can you do this instead? So if they're calling you names at school or you're seeing it and it's being texted to you in screenshots or something, that's what I'm seeing a lot of is kids who think they're having personal conversations with other kids. It's screenshot and it's sent around to the school. And I see that a lot. So what I tell kids in that particular situation, because you did ask a lot about cyberbullying, and one of my big rules is with kids, and when I have discussions, I like to do it in smaller groups because I think we reach more kids that way, age level appropriate. I say to them, think about being on a stage and that everyone's watching you. Every time you enter a social media forum, that is what happens. And I said this to a group of Brownie Girl Scouts not too long ago, and they were middle schoolers. And I said, think about being in this forum and that everyone is watching you. And even people you think are your friends, there is always the potential for your information to get out to others. So you want to be very careful how you respond to social media, because once it goes into the abyss, we can't get it back. We have IP addresses of who the people are. We can take screenshots, which someone once told me, and I thought that was a great piece of advice, and we can certainly bring it to a principal. But that's another thing I would talk about in a moment when we involve the school. So I really would give them solutions such as that and play those out in a role play with empowering them with ideas and a plan of action. Then we go to the empowerment phase, which is empowering the follow through of this plan, which I think is the most important piece. Because a lot of times we'll just let things go and assume that they're handled, and then it comes up again. And I guarantee you with bullying, it can stop and then it can start again. And you don't know when or how. So we want to keep checking in. We want to keep following through on plans with our kids. We want to keep having discussions. We want to keep the role plays going because we want to make sure we at least give them tools that are effective and helpful in guiding them. Now, your next question probably to me, I'm guessing, is what about the school, right? When this happens. So I have, mixed feelings on that because I think you have to tread very lightly. I got a call not too long ago from a parent in another state who actually, her kid was being bullied. It was identified. She went to the school principal, and the school principal was saying, I can handle it. And I guess the school counselor was not around or was part-time and because of budget cuts or something. So the school principal decided to take it up and got basically the bully in trouble, and the parents got upset and then got upset at her daughter. And it made the situation worse. So what happens when you bring the bullying victim together is the re-victimization happens again. And then your child is getting bullied and teased. They're just being more careful about how it's done. And it just feels terrible to the kid who was already bullied. And so I think there's a lack of education in schools. And sometimes they're more open than others to hearing better ways that could support them in their school. So when we go to schools, we have to, and I hate to say this, but it's really the last resort, because when you go to the school, you're potentially opening up the potential for re-victimization to happen. Now, the hope is that the school is educated well and they have had a prevention program in their school. And the first question I would tell you as the parent to ask is, what is the prevention program you're using in the school? Because a lot of times what happens is they mark off a list and do a check sheet and say, okay, we're providing this. What I'm asking you to do as the parent is to ask them, do you have a program in the school, like one I used to work for, where they do a year with the school? They really go in, they work with the teachers, they work with the parents, they work with the students, and they have a letter sent out to the parents so they know this program is being implemented in the school, and they really give it the time it needs so everyone is trained and educated. That's really a prevention-based program. Sometimes, though, I have some friends who do this, and I've done it before, is they go in and do a wonderful presentation to all the different grades, and they're there to talk to afterwards, which is better than the worksheet route. And it can be very effective, but I have seen, and studies have shown with evidence-based practice, that if you implement yourself a longer period in a school, you will make a bigger difference with the overall culture, which is what we need to change. So that is really a program that goes with how to deal with bullying in the school. The other thing you want to be asking as the parent, if you're going to be going to the school, is, I want to see your policy with bullying, because that's going to tell you right away how they're going to handle bullying. Are they actually going to do something about it, or is it just written in such a way? So that is another step. And if they say to you, we don't have a policy on bullying, please ask to see one on harassment, because that should be in every school.
I wanted to know if Danielle had seen a difference in kids that had attended private school versus public school.
Let me put it to you this way. I have seen in the charter and the private schools that they all, and I can't say this about everybody, but in some of my experiences with some of the schools, they will dodge a solution at any length. They will write a letter to suffice families to say that they are zero tolerance policy, and they don't allow it. And yet they don't really provide solutions or someone to go in and really address it so the parents feel that it's being taken care of. They will sort of do more lip service sometimes. And I'm not saying that happens in all schools, but some of the private schools and charter schools that I've also come across, I have found that there's not a lot of true implementation always that happens.
I asked Danielle specifically if she had seen any kids that were attending private schools.
Yes, I do. And I get calls about going to schools in certain situations with kids where there's bullying situations actively happening. I'll talk to the principal for a while and talk about a way that I can come in and do more real work, which is working the way I believe, which is I do one presentation for the parents. So it's just the parents so they can feel comfortable and safe to ask what they want. And I feel the same way about the teachers, that I think the teachers want to feel safe to ask any questions they want. And if they have the parents there, what if potential of their children are sitting right there? It's hard for the parents then to be really honest, or the teachers. So I like to do a separate presentation for them. I like to do consultation with the principal and give him or her some education. And then I like to work with each grade. I like to do more discussion groups and scenarios with the kids because I don't like talking at them. And certainly a PowerPoint is going to bore them really quick. And so that's how I like to go in and work.
As I was researching this topic, I noticed a disturbing pattern. So when I found an older article, I noticed that the age that most people were referencing at the time was the middle school age. And as I got to more articles that were more recent, I noticed that the age started to trickle down into the elementary school level, which concerned me and prompted me to start doing more research into this topic. I asked Danielle if she had noticed that pattern as well.
Yeah, it's starting in preschools. I'm hearing stories about, I got a call not too long ago. I got an email asking if I would see their 5-year-old. And I don't usually work with younger children. I have other people I know who do, but they wanted me to see their 5-year-old who was being bullied. I mean, I know that's surprising, but it's not. I mean, I guess that's what you're kind of saying, right? That it's really happening at an earlier age. It's really a factor. Yes.
I asked Danielle if she had ever experienced working with a child and it wasn't successful.
I had a client who I went through the program with and was doing better. And then we have final, graduation sessions where we commend them on how well they're doing. And we bring a special treat in for them. We go around and say why we're proud and happy. And unfortunately, that did not go well. And there was more bullying revealed in that final graduation session. And so what ended up happening was my client felt worse after the session because the parents didn't know that there was some other bullying that was actually taking place that we just learned about. And one parent knew and one didn't. And the session went really awry. And my client felt worse at the end. And I wanted them to come back in and do some processing because it wasn't the way I anticipated the progress that was made. And that some of the changes that we did see wasn't really acknowledged in that. So that was one of my cases where I, till this day, I feel bad.
I asked Danielle if she believed that the parents not being on the same page was a contributing factor.
I don't know. I think sometimes they were on the same page and sometimes they weren't. So it just depended. I think that the bigger issue was their own reactivity in the moment and the way that they expressed it was the issue, and how they had rightfully so were very upset. And they were caught off guard and thought things had been a little bit better. And then some other stuff was revealed. And I think that it allowed more disappointment to incur and to let that out without holding it in and tolerating it and coming back to it in a different way later. It just came right out.
Our reactions to these situations is very critical. If our kids are perceiving that we are burdened somehow, whether financially or emotionally or spiritually, then they're going to do what it takes to protect us. That is just their nature. That is what they do. So it's very important for us as parents to make sure that we keep our emotions in check. We need to be very careful how we choose to express ourselves. Otherwise, our kids are not going to trust us to handle it.
Yeah, they hide because they don't want the parents to be disappointed with them and they don't want them to have to worry about them. That's the key also. They don't want them to be worried. And that's the one I hear a lot is I don't want my parent to be worried about me. And sometimes kids take care of their parents' feelings more than their own. And I think in this particular case, that was happening quite often.
As a parent, it's a very delicate balance that we need to strike between showing concern for our child and also letting them know that we can handle the situation.
It is. And that's why I really go back to the 3 E's of empathy, empowerment, and engagement. And what I talk a lot about in my book is parents need to have their feelings. And one of the things I say a lot is go ahead and make a lot of mistakes as a parent. I encourage it actually, because here's what kids really need. And this is what didn't happen in this particular session, at least while I was there, maybe it did later, is that there was no follow-up to correct the issue. And what kids really want is correction of the issue. They don't care if mom and dad screw up and make a mistake or get reactive or get upset. It's okay. It's going to happen. You're human, you're parents, you're protective, it's normal. You're the parent. But what needs to still happen is that correcting that experience and going back to them and having better dialogue in a more calm state about what happened and how they want to be there and really support their child to be honest and be able to come through and say what they need to.
I mentioned to Danielle that if she thought it would be a good idea to start implementing the 3 E's under normal circumstances. This way, we're not waiting for a crisis to arise before we start to try to implement them, which in turn may cause our kids to be suspicious about our intentions. This way, we establish the trust early on, and the trust is there when a crisis arises.
I think that's a very good point, actually, that you want to have that trust already there. So if you really need to use the empathy, empowerment, and engagement for a particular crisis situation, you have that honesty built up. And one of the things I talk a lot about in my book is that when parents do approach kids with this empathy, empowerment, and engagement, do it when you haven't had a terrible day at work where your boss yelled at you, or you had a fight with your partner or another one of your children, where you're already feeling so escalated, because it's a touchy, really intense topic that we're speaking about. And so we have to do it delicately. And you want to be really aware of how you're coming off to your child, because you want to develop, as you said, that trust, right? And that only develops over time and how you act and show in your actions to them. Kids really are smart. They're incredibly resilient. And that's what they pay attention to.
Since Danielle mentioned that she had gone to schools to try to take action to prevent bullying, I asked her if she had been in any combative situations.
I had one situation happen. I wouldn't say it was combative, but I was asked about by a parent to come speak at a school. And I was in a conference call with the principal. And I knew there was an active bullying problem going on at the school. And there'd been kids who had left the school because there'd been some bullying issues, and as well as other issues. And I was on the phone with the principal, and the principal, I was calling it bullying. And what I see sometimes, and this is what my colleagues have been seeing, is they don't want you to call it bullying. They don't sometimes want it to be acknowledged, because then there's, I think, an issue of worrying about liability if we own that it's bullying. And so sometimes they'll ask, some of my peers and colleagues have been asked in their presentations to not call it bullying and use other words for their presentations. And so in this conversation that I had, basically the principal kind of came back at me and said something very strongly about it not being bullying, and got a little frustrated. So at those points, what I do is I back off. I don't get escalated with them. I hear them out, and I try to hear their perspective so we can kind of get on the same page so that I can work with them. And then by the end of the conversation, because he strongly kind of approached it differently in the beginning, he was much softer, and he was actually using the word bullying. So you have to really know how to come at the schools, not making them the bad guys, but how to help work together in an education of what needs to be done, and supporting them and supporting that process of our community.
It seems like the kids are getting bullying fatigue, meaning that every time that the word bullying is mentioned, you get a roll of the eyes. In contrast, when schools hear the word bullying, immediately they go into a defensive posture. So it's important to distinguish what is and what isn't bullying.
Yes, because they interchange that word a lot. In fact, I think one of the very first chapters of my book is called What is Bullying and What Is It Not? So I really get clear on trying to differentiate the differences, because a lot of times we use that word and it's really not bullying. And some people have come to me and said, well, isn't this bullying? And they use that word. And I say, no, that's really not bullying. This is what I think it is instead. So there really is got to be clarity in that.
I asked Danielle if there was any support for parents to help them deal with their kid being bullied.
That's one thing that my program does, is I provide sessions with the parents for education too. And I get it a lot of times, questions about, oh, is this a group? Why aren't you doing your program as a group? And that the reason is because I want to reach the parents in the school. And I think it's a bigger issue. And if I just do a group, I'm reaching the kids in the group. So when I do my program with the parents, I really educate them. They have an activity book, and then we also do work in the school together. So they're getting that support, hopefully, through the program. But I have to say the program has, gone slowly with people, getting into a program, because everyone has other activities and I think get very busy. So it becomes a time issue for how much support parents want to go get regarding bullying as well. And that's one thing we do in my program is we do practice with role plays. So we're really learning not only what to do, but how to do it and implementation of it. And that's what's really important, is that implementation and that learning. And yes, if you compare, I would just go beat the kid up. I've heard that a lot from dads in the past, and that's what I would do. But that was the days when you didn't have social media, right? There wasn't that. So this is a whole different ball of wax that we're dealing with now, an intensity of problems that we never knew were in existence before.
I asked Danielle, what if the parent doesn't have the skill to help their kids navigate through this situation of being bullied? How do you help them?
I empower them that they can handle it. I have a phrase that I learned from an 8th grade English teacher saying knowledge is power. The more knowledge we have power to change. And I feel that way with learning, is that parents can have learning and they can change and it can make a difference, and we empower them, because sometimes they feel as low as their kids do, like they feel as helpless, right? So that's helpless feeling. So we bring hope into the profession with the people that I know in the field of working in bowling. And we want to be hopeful because, I had a friend not too long ago say to me, Danielle, maybe you're ahead of your time. Maybe people just aren't ready for this kind of level of work. And I turned to them and I said, the problem with that is that might be true and not everyone's ready for this, what's happening right now. But here's the problem. We have kids dying. So what do we do about that? How do we handle that? And that becomes my problem, is that I can't continue to watch kids die.
I asked Danielle what she thinks about why kids are making the decision to end their lives.
I think they don't feel they can do anything else, and everything is just at a loss. I mean, if you take the example, and again, this is just a piece of it in 13 Reasons Why, the first season with Hannah Baker, Hannah couldn't handle it anymore. And she didn't want, and she was internalizing a lot of her issues and feelings and then putting them on tapes, but she didn't want to reach out. And I think kids have to feel safe to reach out. And that also has to take a level of strength to feel like it's okay to want help. And a lot of kids feel like they have to do things themselves, even till the end. And that's why I'm hopeful that with my work and my colleagues' work, that we can bring more awareness and education and hope back, so this doesn't have to happen. I don't want to see kids get to that point where they feel suicidal or they attempt or succeed. I do feel hopeful that with empowering parents and empowering kids, there are other solutions that can be done. And it's not an easy road, and I would never make it that way. But it's certainly, if kids know they're supported and there's a place to talk about things where they're not going to get in trouble, they're not going to have reactivity, and there's going to be an openness to that dialogue, it's going to create safety, correct? So that safety will be there, as you said very well earlier on, that you have to start that early. So when the issue really comes, that safety's there.
I mentioned to Danielle that my wife and I are trying to spend some alone time with each of our daughters so that we can build up that trust and we can provide a safe place for them to talk to us about whatever is on their mind.
The other thing that I hear a lot about parents is the car rides. Those are really powerful. That's a time that they can really talk. I have one friend who said to me that that's the time of the day she likes taking her child to school, even though her child's older at this point, because they still have those conversations and they get to talk. And that's the time she really gets with her daughter, or one of the times, maybe not the whole time, to really have that dialogue.
Based on Danielle's experience, this is what she believes is the most misunderstood thing about bullying.
I think that's a hard question because there's so many misconceptions, but one of them that I see quite a bit, that it's part of life and it's normal, and that it's something that happens to everyone and it's just part of growing up. That's the one I hear a lot. And that's the hard one for me because it shouldn't be that way. And it's traumatizing. I can't tell you how many, because I'm also a presenter. So I do a lot of presentations, and I can't tell you how many people and adults have come up to me later on in life and said that they're still traumatized by the bullying and that it's been hard for them to move forward. And I see that sometimes in my own practice where I have young adults who, because of the bullying and the way they were treated, they're stuck. They're stuck getting into interpersonal relationships. They're stuck moving forward professionally because they still feel like that bullied child.
So why can't parents just take control? Take the initiative to solve the problem for our kids?
Because taking the control is not allowing your kids to learn how to handle their own problems. There's a very good book out there by Julie Lincott Hames called The Helicopter Parent. And she was a dean at Stanford for 10 years and saw all the admissions come in with all the wonderful essays and the test scores. And what Julie found was that kids were failing out of school, out of college, because they didn't know how to handle their own problems. And if parents took over, then they didn't know how to socially and emotionally navigate their worlds. And so that's why parents can't take over. Parents can guide, parents can suggest, they can follow through, they can be consistent, but they cannot tell them how to handle things because kids have to learn themselves. So as you said before, they do have to fall. We have to let them fall. It's painful. It's hard as a parent to watch that, but we have to let it happen. But we can help guide them and be hopeful to pull them back up again. And then that learning happens when they are pulled down. They realize they can get up again. And, as adults, we all have to learn that. And if parents take over everything and do everything for kids, they never learn that. That's really important. And it's a hard thing for parents, I think, because they just want to make it better. And they want to solve the problem, as you said, but it doesn't work like that.
Danielle leaves us with some final thoughts.
The only thing I would say is that I believe there's hope out there, and I don't think any situation is hopeless. I think with tools and guidance and support, we can help kids heal from bullying. I really do believe that. And I, have a program that you can look at, and you can find me on my website, www.empowerment.space. I have blog articles on there about various issues and topics with bullying, and you can certainly find me for a free 30-minute consultation if you're interested in some more information on bullying. So I want to put that out there as well. But I don't think parents have to be hopeless or helpless, nor do I think kids can be. As I said to my friend, we have to change what happens in this world. We can't continue to let kids hurt themselves. We have to make a change, and I think we can. I am hopeful.
Establishing trust with our kids is not a given. It takes work. It takes dedication. It takes commitment, and it doesn't happen overnight. We need to begin as soon as they are able to hold a conversation with us. We need to create those special moments where they feel safe enough to give us a glimpse into their lives. And if we're lucky, with enough glimpses, maybe we can glean enough to piece together some useful advice that they will carry with them through the rest of their lives. I hope this series has given you insight, but more so, has given you some tools to help you with your children, or maybe even help someone you know. If you want to give feedback, request access to the bullying discussion group on Facebook. Everyone is welcome. If Facebook isn't your thing, then go over to Twitter and DM me, or you can always send me an email. All the links are in the show notes. I want to thank Danielle for meeting with me on short notice. Her advice is invaluable. Danielle provides a complimentary 30-minute phone consultation. Just go to her website for more details. And you can find the link, as well as her contact info, on awareness.podcast.com/guests. I want to thank Shane Yoder and his team at puttheminasong.com for the awareness theme. And thanks to my family for being there for me and allowing me to do this for you. Until next time, stay aware, be aware, and I'll talk to you soon.